Welcome, everybody. My name is Aaron Ortiz. I think I'm the first workshop for Stormwater Awareness Week, so I'm honored to be here, and thank you. You can join us this morning. The first class is talking about, or the workshop is about IGP basics and IGP being the Industrial General Stormwater Permit. So just a couple of quick notes. We're going to jump in right away. I have a lot of slides to go through, so I'm going to try to work through it as quickly as I can. I have help from Danny. He's going to help me keep on track and let me know when we're getting close to the end. Also, if you have a chat and you want to ask a chat question, you're welcome to do so. Danny will let me know if there's a question that comes up, and I'll see if I can address it if we have time. So let's go ahead and jump in and get started on the training. And again, welcome to everybody who's joined us online. So the first question is, why are we here? Why do we have the Industrial General Stormwater Permit? What's this all about? How come we have to do this? I mean, I get that question a lot. So I thought, well, let's address it. Well, back in 1948, there was a federal Water Pollution Control Act, which was helped to kind of keep the water cleaner, but it had no real teeth. It had no real enforcement ability. And then what happened was there was a series of situations, mostly centered around the Cuyahoga River. As you can see the background picture, you can see that basically a river is on fire. Yes, that is a river. The Cuyahoga River is on fire. And what happened was there was different companies that were dumping just all types of stuff into the water. And the Cuyahoga River had pretty much been killed. It had so much sludge and it had so much pollutants in it that nothing was surviving. And then it would often catch on fire more than once. And this is back before the days of internet. I mean, if most people can't even conceive of that. But back then, there was one time in the early 70s where the media showed up for an event, and at that time, the river had caught on fire again. And so they happened to be there and be able to witness it, and that actually got international or national coverage. And so from that, people realized, hey, we can't allow this kind of pollution on our surface waters. So from the Cuyahoga River and different situations like that, eventually they revamped the old Federal Water Pollution Control Act and basically created the Clean Water Act. And from that, we also get things like the EPA and different things were all stemmed from that time. And so what happened was they wanted to control what they call point sources, or where businesses were letting water go into the surface waters of the United States. And it was working well. Surface waters were getting better, but there was still some way too much pollution in the stormwater. So in 1987, they amended the Clean Water Act and expanded the NPDES permit program. And then in 1990, they finalized some situations and they created the general permit. And then they started, I don't know, in California in 1992, they actually started the general permit program. So in the general permit program, it requires that you set up two things. The permit has quite a few things. It's got 208 pages, the current one. But in it, they required you to create a stormwater pollution prevention plan and then a monitoring plan, which we call the Monitoring Implementation Plan, or the MIP. And this document put together is what helps people to be able to follow the rules of the general permit. Now, people say, well, when they have their SWEP binder, say, well, here's my permit. Well, no, actually, that's your plan that permit requires you to have. So here's an example of what the current permit is as of July 1st. You have a little link below that you can, if you'd like to get copies of the slides, let me know. I'll be happy to send you the copies of the slides. We'll probably post them on the website, so that way you can get this website and see the current one for yourself. And as you can see, sections 10 and 11 are the two sections that we're going to focus on, because that's what we have to talk about today, about what is it required. So what is in the permit? What is this? What do we have to cover? And what we're looking in particular in this session, in this part one, is the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan section. So let's take a look at it. As of July 1st of this year, the general permit was amended. First, it came out in 92, then it came out in 97. And then from 97 until 2015, we had a permit, and there's a clause where it allows the permit to maintain enforcement until a new one takes its place. And they never got around, or they kept running up into barriers and things until finally, I believe it was in 2014 they adopted it, and in 2015 it came into effect, the permit. And then as of July 1st, the permit that we've had since 2015 has been amended. So it was amended back in November November 6th of 2018. And what we have posted now is, it says of unofficial draft. So people see that and they think, well, is it enforced or is it not enforced? Well, the reason we have an unofficial draft posted is because they just haven't got the clerk, the water board clerk hasn't assigned a number to it yet. Okay, but they're in
hear my phone call.
So, please note that even though it's an unofficial draft, the requirements are still being enforced. So even though it's posted, it says unofficial draft, the requirements in this draft are enforceable, and people are expected to follow the rules. So let's talk about BMPs. So again, the question in this part is, what are we doing here? What's this all about? Okay. Well, first of all, we're going to talk about BMPs. What is a BMP? Well, here's the official definition. It says basically scheduling of activities, prohibitions, or practices, basically procedures or management practices to prevent the discharge of pollutants. BMPs also include requirements of operating procedures. Basically, there it is. That's your long official definition. But I like to put mine in my own words. So basically, in other words, anything you do or practice or anything you build or structure to reduce or eliminate pollutants in stormwater. Okay, so let's take a look. What kind of BMPs are there? Well, first of all, oh, by the way, good morning, Steve. Good to see you. Minimum BMPs. The permit, as of 2015, has two sets of BMPs. You have the minimum, basically non-structural mandatory BMPs. In other words, everybody has to do these. In the 97 permit, they give you a list of these BMPs and say, hey, you should be practicing these, and these are a good idea. However, they found that some people were not applying all of them, and there was a lot of issues. So in the 2015 permit, they made the basic, mostly non-structural BMPs as mandatory. In other words, it's no longer an option. You need to apply these to your facility. And one thing to keep in mind, this is a surface waters permit. So that means water going to the surface waters of the United States, creeks, rivers, dry lake beds, anything where it goes to a surface waters of the United States and you discharge or have water leaves your property to that, that's what this permit covers. It doesn't cover all of it. It mentions groundwater, but its purpose is to regulate discharges to the surface waters of the United States. So you have BMPs, mandatory minimum ones, and then you have advanced BMPs, which are mostly structural, which are things what you build or you create. So, and you're expected to the extent feasible, implement these BMPs. So minimum BMPs consist mostly of non-structural practices under the current IGP are required to be applied to each facility with permit coverage. Okay, so again, it's a requirement. You can't just say, hey, this is an option. Whether you feel they're valid or not, these are mandatory minimum BMPs. In Section X.H.1 of the IGP, it requires to be implemented to maintain the extent feasible. So that's important language. What do they mean to extent feasible? In other words, to the best of your ability, you need to, and the footnote kind of defines that as requiring discharges to design, install, implement, prevent discharges of pollutants in their water discharge in a manner that reflects best industry practice, considering technological availability and economic practicability and achievability. They love the word practicability, by the way. So in other words, let's put it in English, shall we? How you implement your minimum BMPs needs to meet with what your industry is doing in general and is technologically and economically achievable or available and achievable. In other words, they don't expect you to come up with some sort of brand new, it needs to be something where it's available, it's something that's available now. They're not expecting the U.S. enterprise to land in your front yard and clean your stormwater for you. That's not technologically achievable. But you can sweep. You can put in filtration devices. You can put in curbs and covers. You can put in some things in place. You can sweep like you're supposed to. That's a minimum BMP. You can do different things. So let's talk about the minimum BMPs that are feasible, that are to the end. Now, again, this is a general permit. So what do they mean by general permit? Well, and in 92, when they instituted the general permits, what they're saying is they have a certain general group of guidelines. And then what you do is you plug in your facility and say, here's how we plan to apply these general guidelines. So that's why your stormwater pollution prevention plan, your SWEP, come in handy, because basically it says, here's the minimum BMPs, and here's how we are going to apply the minimum BMPs. Okay, I see kind of a side note. I've seen some SWEPs out there where basically they just take the language from the permit and put it in their document, but that's it. Well, that's kind of not the point. The point is you're supposed to say, here's the minimum BMP, and then you're supposed to say in your SWEP how you plan to apply that to your facility. So good housekeeping means you observe all outside industrial areas, including potential pollutants from offsite sources or anything that might affect stormwater discharges, to determine how best to clean areas. Sweeping, frequency, power. In other words, they're not going to tell you you have to sweep 15 times a day, or you have to do this. What they say is you have to do good housekeeping. Now, how you do good housekeeping, that's where your SWEP comes in, and that's where you determine how you're going to apply it. But everybody at minimum can sweep up. Anybody at minimum can clean up. It's, you know, like the old adage, like your parents used to say, clean up your room. Well, let's clean up what we have. 2, another mandatory minimum BMP is preventative maintenance. Okay. Basically, identify and determine all stationary facility or mobile equipment and systems used outdoors that may spill or cause pollutants. Okay. So what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to take a look at your mandatory minimum BMPs and determine and to say, okay, how are we going to keep these up? So lots of times the biggest problem I see is someone puts a BMP in place. For example, one of the things that we like to use a lot as a first step BMP, the old permit, by the way, calls something called the iterative process, or the step-by-step process, where you start small and you work your way up, and you see where you're at, and then if you need to add more, you add more, and you keep adding more until your water is where it needs to be by the requirements. So one of the first things you can start with is, for example, maybe using some sort of filtration sock, or like a Filtrix silt sock, whatever, for solids or different things. And you put that in place, and there's people put those in place and then just leave them, and then for 2 years later, it's the same sock they had there. Well, after a while, that sock or that BMP is no longer going to work because it's been there too long. So you need to do maintenance on your BMPs. So clean up, change your BMPs out. You're supposed to maintain maintenance on those. 2, spill and leak prevention and response. So you see, okay, and one thing you'll find about the permit is they again, it went from 97 pages to 208 in 2015, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to explain to people, here's how you do it. Because people would see something in the old permit, the 97 permit, and they'd interpret it in any number of wild ways. And so the water board tried to take more time and more space in the permit to explain what they mean by what they say. So you need to develop procedures or controls to minimize spills and leaks. So this BMP has a two sides to a coin. First side is spill and leak prevention and response. Okay, and then the second one, and then the second part of it is and response. So the first part is, how can we prevent spills or leaks? What can we do? What procedures we have that we can help prevent these from happening? But then life happens. Spills happen. Things happen. I mean, it's life. So with that realization and that reality in place, you have the second half where it says and response. So you have the spill leak prevention, where you try to prevent in the first place, but then life happens. So then you have response. So you need to have procedures. Okay, well, how do we respond to a spill? So your SWEP is supposed to have not only your procedures try to minimize things. Well, when it happens, what do we do? And so those are controls. And something you'll see throughout this is many times they'll say develop a procedure or make a determination. Why? They want you to think through your stormwater program before things happen. They want you to be proactive. The whole point of having positive stormwater results is you're proactive, and you'll see that that's kind of a running theme throughout the whole permit. So if you create procedures, you have things in place, and people need to know where those procedures are. They need to know what they are. I've been to places where I said, okay, where's your spill kits? And they look at me like I'm from outer space. Now, the EH&S guy, the guy who does the environmental, he could tell me where every spill kit is and what's in them. But you go to the guy out on the floor and say, hey, where's your spill kit? What's going on here? And they're like, I don't know, I think it's around here somewhere. Not a good idea. Everybody who's working out there, everybody who's going to deal with it, they need to know at least a minimum of what to do and how to do it. So another mandatory minimum BMP is material handling and waste management. So that's a big deal because how you handle your materials can help prevent a lot of waste from going to storm drains. Okay. Now here's where you become the expert. You know, I could tell you about the permit. I could tell you about the requirements of the permit. I could tell you what the state expects. But when it comes to material handling, no one is more knowledgeable about what you do than you. So look at your things. How can you prevent or minimize the handling of industrial materials in a way that can readily mobilize contact with stormwater? So for example, I have a client that they're actually they're closed now. I guess the whole COVID thing shut them down. But they used to have garnet that they would use inside their so garnet is basically like sandpaper, the grit from sandpaper, and they'd use these jets to cut metal, and they'd use these giant water cutters. And then what they would do is they would after a while, the garnet would get too small and the water cutters would no longer be effective. So they'd have to muck out all the garnet out of there, and they would put it and they'd have to transport it out to the holding section they had outside for where waste management would pick it up. So that was good. Where they stored their old garnet, it was all enclosed. It was a good situation. But between their warehouse and where they stored their garnet, they drove in these giant tipping hoppers where they'd fill them up and then go there. They'd open the lever and they would dump and go into the holding bin. The problem is they'd fill these hoppers all the way to the top. And so as they drive between the warehouse and their storage area, things would slosh and splash out. Because, you know, forklifts are not designed for comfort, they're designed for work. And so they're not very smooth. And so they would splash out, stuff would get all over the place. And they were getting lots of metals because they were cutting aluminum and different types of metals and using the water cutters. And so I said, well, why don't you just fill it, you know, as a procedure or as a material handling situation, why don't you just fill these halfway? That way you don't get all that splash. So they started filling them halfway. They had to do an extra trip or two, but yet they no longer had a lot of that spillage all over the ground that went into the storm drain system. So how they handled their materials and how they handled their waste made a dramatic difference. So how do you handle your waste? How do you handle your materials? This is where you become an expert and think through, again, you're thinking through the program. What can we do? All right, so erosion and sediment controls. Well, there was some on that in the old permit that was the 97 permit, but this permit talks more about it because if you do an industrial activity where you're causing dust or dirt or whatever to be picked up, or if you store stuff where the wind can blow it off, what they're saying is you need to try to minimize that. The whole point is you're trying to mitigate what you do so that it doesn't affect stormwater discharges as much. So, and in this permit that came out in 2015 and really hasn't changed. This part of it hasn't changed with the amendments in July. Is basically, is there some way you can keep the wind from blowing your product into the storm drains? I have a client where they use giant piles of sulfur, and one client has, there's two different ones that do that. One has these giant tall walls they surround their sulfur. Another one has these giant screens they put up so that the wind doesn't just blow the sulfur off down the storm drain. So that's effective wind controls. Also for rain, if you have product, you don't want it washing away. So I'm sure you probably have some controls already in place simply because it just makes good business practices. And by the way, you'll find that a lot of these minimum BMPs are just common sense stuff that you would do anyway. So you might as well put it in your SWEP and get credit for it as being a BMP. I mean, you're going to do it anyway because it just makes good sense, good business sense. So employee training program. Okay, in fact, that's why we're here today. The permit requires that the pollution prevention team members, in other words, those who help develop and maintain the SWEP, are personnel and contractors, anybody that's going to work on your site, they need to have an understanding and be appropriately trained to do the IGP requirements, the industrial general permit requirements. Okay, and so I've seen one time I walked out to a client and they had a worker outside and he had something that looked like chocolate milk and I saw him just pouring it down the storm drain. And so I walked in and I talked to the H&S guy and I said, by the way, I just saw someone just dump something down your storm drain, which if I were the EPA, you guys would be fined right now. So I'm glad I work for you. So he ran out there and they were able to, they found it was localized because the drain had a sump. And so they were able to clean it up and get it, you know, so it didn't go down the storm drain system and have to cause a big old cleanup, through the whole storm drain system all the way to the McCollum River. But that was the good news. But the thing is, basically, they didn't train their staff on the general BMPs. A lot of their staff came from different parts of the world, and a lot of them didn't have a lot of the background and stormwater requirements that some other would. So they had to take time to go back and teach their team members, hey, we don't do this anymore. We keep this place clean. We don't dump stuff down the storm drain. It's illegal. Now, as a side note, this permit has different levels, which is a more detailed thing we're not going to get to in this training, because again, we only have an hour. But if you grab samples and you go to a level 1 for a parameter, you're required to have a qualified industrial stormwater practitioner, a QISP, someone with my credentials, do your training, because they want to make sure that the permit in 2015 created an official position called the QISP. And this official position is for people who know the permit, who've been in the stormwater industry for a while, who have an understanding of the permit and its requirements. So that way, if you do have to respond to overages, we call exceedances, and we have things called numeric action levels, NALs, and now as of July 1st, we have some other things too. But again, in this format, we're not going to have a chance to go into the NELs and to the TNELs and all that other things that the permit requires. But needless to say, if you go over the requirements, you have to create what they call a level 1 report and level 2 report. The permit requires that you have someone with my credentials help you with your response. Someone who's got the training, someone who's got the understanding of the permit, someone who knows stormwater and can help you apply and respond to the overages. Quality assurance and record keeping. This one hasn't hardly even changed since the old 97 permit. It's basically, you're supposed to make sure you maintain you're tracking your stormwater. I mean, the applications are a little bit different, but you've always required to hold on to your documentation, to do observations, make sure that people know what's in the SWIP and what they're required to do. Make sure that you keep records on file for up to 5 years. That's the permit requires that you need a record on site of and readily available for up to 5 years. And so that's another minimum required BMP. Now let's talk about advanced BMPs. And we're making good time. We're at 7:22 right now, so we're making really good time, which I'm happy for. Advanced BMPs are mostly structural BMPs that, again, you're required to install if it's feasible and practicable. Okay. Some people, when they think of advanced BMPs, they think of things, like treatment systems, which is a advanced BMP, or monster ponds or things like that. And while that's true, those are advanced BMPs, there are other less dramatic BMPs, like for example, curbs. That's an advanced BMP because you're channeling the water. So let's talk a little bit about this. Okay. Exposure minimization. Okay. Exposure minimization is basically things to prevent from coming into contact with stormwater in the first place. So rain-resistant shelters, covers. I have a client that's a recycling facility here in Lodi, and they were required to have permit coverage because of their SIC code requiring permit coverage. And so one of the things I told them is, well, because you're limited to just this little space here, why don't you just put a cover over it, and then you can actually file for a notice no exposure certification, NEC notice. NEC is where basically you do everything inside, you're undercover, and so you can, as if you're not exposed to stormwater, you can file for and successfully get an NEC. And they're very specific, by the way, they're very specific requirements for that. So make sure that you consult the QISP in helping you with that. But many times it's just not practical or feasible to have NECs for everything, but you can cover where you can. Carports, covers, cover things up, do things undercover. That's all shelters. That's that exposure minimization. That's a great way, because one of the things to remember, if you cover it up and it doesn't get in the stormwater, it's not going to be there for you to grab when you grab your samples. If you have to grab a sample and you have stuff covered and it's not getting exposed to stormwater, and then you're not going to have to worry about it messing up your stormwater numbers. Another advanced BMP are stormwater containment and discharge reduction BMPs. Okay, containment and discharge reduction BMPs include infiltration, percolation, using or the same way containing or reducing the volume of stormwater runoff. What does that mean? Okay, let's put it into English again. In other words, do you have, by the way, we're going to get to something called treatment control BMPs in a minute. You see a little red? There are very specific requirements if you're going to call something a treatment BMP, and we'll get to that in a minute. But containment means you put a pond in. All right, so your water goes through a pond first, and that's a really good BMP because it helps water to settle out. So if you have solids that are built up, it has a tendency to help settle them out. It has a tendency that if you have containment, you can have it to where you have less discharges. In fact, this BMP, they encourage you to do it. So that's a very positive thing. If you can run water through a vegetative area, it can pull out pollutants out of there and soak water into the ground. The whole point is there's a philosophy in stormwater that's been out there for a while. It's called LID, which is low impact development. So LID, basically the whole idea behind it is they want you to try to contain and absorb water into the ground water table as much as you can on site. In other words, what this ground would have been able to absorb prior to building something there, if you can get to that, they would like you to try to reach for that goal to try to capture as much water that would normally be captured in an area. Okay, lots of times people do that by building a pond and run all their water to a pond. If the pond isn't big enough to be considered a treatment control BMP, that's okay. It's still a pond. It's still going to reduce the number of samples. So many times you'll find that storms are pretty small, or we have passing storms, and you have a pond that fills up. So you never even have to grab a sample because discharge is water leaving your property. You don't have to worry about that. If it's not leaving your property, you don't have to grab a sample. So it's a good thing because then you're absorbing the water, you're capturing the water, and that really is encouraged to do LID practices. And so that's what they're saying here. How can you reduce the amount of water leaving your property? How can you capture that water? How can you percolate it in the ground? Or in some cases, I had a client in Stockton where they captured a lot of their water and would then use it in their process. They were a chemical company that had 1,000 different chemicals. They had paperwork. I've never had so many chemicals I had to deal with in a sweat before. But this company, what they did was they would capture their stormwater, and they'd have huge tanks where they would transfer their water to that, and then they'd use that captured stormwater in their process. And so that way they didn't have to use as much water during the summer. Of course, they had to get the tap water to use for their process. But in the wintertime, many times they'd just capture a lot of their water and use that for the process. And if they had too much water, they would transfer the rest of it to a pond they had in their backyard. So they never had a discharge because whatever water they didn't capture and use in their process, the rest went to their pond. So they really had the whole stormwater containment and discharge reduction BMP really down really well. And the water board loves that because they want you to be able to hold on to your water. Now let's talk about treatment control BMPs. Okay, a treatment control BMP includes putting into place something mechanically, chemically, or biologically that treats stormwater. For a BMP to be considered a treatment control BMP as outlined in the permit, it has to meet with certain standards that you'll find in Section X.H.1.f of the general permit, of the IGP. Okay, and it's very specific. For example, you can call a pond a treatment control BMP if it can handle 85th percentile 24-hour storm. Okay, so that's a certain storm criteria. Also, the criteria requires that a California licensed professional engineer has to certify that yes, this pond can handle this amount of water. There's also different types, like you can have what they call rain gardens, or you can have bio-retention cells, or you can have different things where it's a treatment train where it actually treats stormwater using plants and bio-infiltration. And if that's certified by a professional engineer to be able to handle an 80th percentile storm or equivalent storm, they actually give documents, they cite documents, and the professional engineer has to be the one that puts the stamp on it. So if the professional engineer says, yes, it meets the standard, you can call it a treatment control BMP. I have some clients where they have rather massive ponds, and they never just had to check to see if it can match any of these treatment BMPs. And so they decided to have a professional engineer do the calculation to find out your pond may not reach the standard. We have something called a NONA. A NONA is a notice of non-applicability. In other words, you have a pond so big that it captures the largest storm in history and a series of storms leading up to the largest storm in history. That is a huge pond. Very few people can meet that standard. But I have a lot of clients who have pretty good sized ponds, and even though it doesn't reach the NONA capacity, it sure reaches the 85th percentile capacity. So they call it a treatment control. All their water goes to that pond, and many of my clients, until I think 2016, 17 year, where we had those massive storms come through, we had like 8 inches of rain in one storm. Other than that, their ponds have never discharged. So, and because it's big enough, they were able to get a treatment control BMP and call it that. So say you build a pond and you can't, and it doesn't quite meet that standard, or you build a pond and it's probably that big. However, you don't have the funds or the ability to pay for a professional engineer to certify that, then still put it in, because you can still it's still an advanced BMP. It's a discharge control or control BMP. It may not be considered a treatment BMP as outlined in Section X.H.1.f of the permit, but it's still a really good idea. Continue on with treatment control BMPs. So you'll see that footnotes 15, 16, and 17 of the current one, because again, it was updated in July, so there's been some changes where things are. But basically, it has to be certified by a professional engineer in order for it to be considered a treatment control BMP. They have, and then what they do is basically you can do things where it's not really described in any of the other advanced BMPs, and so they have this category called other. So something I mentioned earlier, I mentioned one thing we like to use a lot or recommend for clients is something called a Filtrex, where it's a compost stock. They come in different sizes, and this compost has been sterilized and cleaned so that way it doesn't contribute negative stuff to your stormwater. And it is a form of treatment because water goes through the sock, and it helps to filter out solids and things that go through the sock and go down the storm drain. So that's good. But that really doesn't match any of the other advanced BMPs that are listed. So what you do is you have to you can't put it in there as, oh, this is an advanced BMP. This is we call it the other category, because you can't. No professional engineer is going to certify that as being handling an 85th percentile storm, and it doesn't fit any other categories. So I actually went through this a lot faster than expected. Because I'm used to cramming through this. So I'd like to entertain some questions. I know a lot of people are muted there. So we can go back over some of the ground I covered before. Is there any questions about the jump permit in general? Does anybody have any chats for me? Any questions? So again, to back up to while we're waiting. So again, you have these different minimum BMPs and you have these advanced BMPs, and the best matter practices are there. They're designed so that you have to make sure, and you have to, the minimum are required. They're required to be done. Good housekeeping, all these things. The treatment controls are required to put them in if it's feasible. Now let's go back to walk over some ground real quick. To the extent feasible, that's something that you get a lot of. What is that? Well, the permit talks about that when they first wrote the permit, they actually, the one that we were under until July, and we're pretty much still under. It's just been revised a little bit, but basically one of the things that people were concerned about when they had the workshops for the new permit was, well, I mean, you tell us to do these things, but we can't do this financially. You know, we don't have the ability to put in these kind of systems. So they put the language in to the extent feasible, so that people will say, listen, it's not reasonable, it's not feasible for us financially or otherwise to be able to install these things. So that's why they say, well, to the extent feasible, can we do this? And the answer is yes, it's feasible. What's feasible? And what's feasible is, what is your industry doing in general?
Hey, Aaron, we have a quick question, actually. It's
yes.
It says, what is a treatment BMP and what is not considered to be a treatment BMP?
Okay, that's a pretty broad question. A treatment BMP is anything structural. Let me go back because they actually have a definition on that. So we can see that, because I went through it pretty quickly, so that's a good question. Okay. So a treatment BMP is anything that actually treats the stormwater mechanically, physically, or biologically. So in other words, if you use chemicals, or if you use a filtration, if you use something physical that affects mechanical, or if you filter it and it cleans your water up before it leaves your property, that's a advanced treatment BMP. Now, again, in order for it to be considered a treatment BMP, it has to be certified by a California licensed engineer. And you have a couple one. You have, like I said, in order for it to, the pond, you have to be able to handle an 83 percentile 24-hour storm. And then there's some other criteria in there too. That's why they know that people are not, businesses are not professional engineers. They're not stormwater experts. So when it comes to certifying a treatment BMP, it has to be something that actually is certified by a professional engineer. So it's something physical. It's something you build that mechanically, chemically, or in some way you affect that water, you treat that water to make it cleaner, to make it pull out pollutants from it. So when it leaves your property, it's cleaner. So it can be anything from a treatment system, like a filtration system of some kind. It could be ponds, which are real popular. A lot of people use ponds with infiltration. It could be a bioretention cell where water goes through and slows things, kind of like miniature ponds, or rain gardens. You can do bioremediation. You run water through vegetative areas to help pull out pollutants. And that's a treatment BMP, and as long as it's certified by a California licensed professional engineer saying that yes, it meets the criteria outlined in Section 10H.6 of the permit, it's considered a treatment BMP. That's a very good question.
And then the part two to that, would something like a composite sock be considered a treatment BMP?
It's a form of treatment BMP, but it's not an official treatment BMP as outlined in the permit. A composite sock is good. They'll filter out water. It depends on what it is. And so in a sense, it's like a treatment BMP. However, we can't designate it as a treatment BMP because it won't meet that professional engineer requirement. So unless the professional engineer says, yes, this treats water and it can handle 80 percentile storm, or the other criteria that they describe in the documentation for a professional engineer to adhere to, it can't be called an official treatment BMP. That's why we have that other category. So that sock would go into that category there. That's a good question, by the way. So yeah, we still have 20 minutes. So we have, I really raced through this because I'm used to not having as much time, and I'm used to having a live audience where people ask me questions all the time, and it takes more time. So we actually did really, we did good on this one. I had a quick
question, Aaron.
Yes, sir.
Maybe you can explain a little bit more for an industrial facility. How would you know if the industrial general permit applies to what you do?
Oh, that is an excellent question. Thank you. We get this a lot. Some people will call or ask us, hey, I think I need to have industrial stormwater permit coverage, but am I required? Well, a lot of times they'll have us do an assessment of the facility, because in the industrial general stormwater permit, there are different sectors. In fact, let's go do a little more history since we have a moment here, since we have some time. You have, when they created the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, the NPDES program, they have different businesses that are categorized by what they call SIC codes, Standard Industrial Classification Codes, okay? And these SIC codes describe, these 4-digit numbers describe what a business is and what it does. And so what happened was, when they were forming these national pollutant discharges, NPDES permits, they're saying, well, there's certain categories of facilities that have a higher chance of polluting stormwater discharges. So what they did was they said, for these categories of SIC codes, we're just going to automatically require them to have general permit requirement coverage. So it's based on what you do. So I had one client where I went to the facility, and they have several businesses all relating to woodworking and milling and things like that. And this one facility, what they did, actually, even though it was related in some things, their industrial activity didn't actually qualify them to require to have permit coverage. And so I said, this facility here in Modesto doesn't need permit coverage. But what I recommend is if you're not sure, you should have a quiz, do an assessment of your facility, assessment of your industrial activities, and say, hey, this does not require permit coverage, or yes, it does require permit coverage. And so it's a good way to have someone who's got some understanding knowledge look into that for you. And so it's really based on the Standard Industrial Classification Code, the SIC codes. And so some facilities, for example, they have an SIC code that's in the 4,000 category. Well, what's that? That's, if you look in attachment A of the permit, that's the section where it has different facilities who are required to have permit coverage. So if you want to know if you have permit coverage, start with going to the Industrial General Stormwater Permit and go to attachment A. And in attachment A, it has different categories and tells you these categories require permit coverage. Now, here's something that's interesting. In category 8 of attachment A, that's in the 4,000 range. A lot of those facilities are required to have general permit coverage only if they fuel their own fleets, or they do washing of their fleets, or they do mechanical repairs of their fleets. So I have some clients where all they do was store fuels, giant 42,000 barrel tanks all over the facility. They have tank farms, and they, of course, they have 1,000 regulations that they follow. But I realized, based on their industrial code, because they didn't have their own fleets, they weren't filling their own individual facilities. They were filling up trucks that go to gas stations. But what they did, their industrial activity under attachment 8 of their SIC code, that it didn't require them to have permit coverage. So I recommended in 2014, before the new permit had come out at that time, I said, you should probably file for notice of termination based on the fact that your SIC code, even though it's in category 8, also because of your industrial activity, doesn't require you to have permit coverage. And so it took some convincing because they were concerned they didn't want to violate the rules. And I get that, it's better safe than sorry. But from that, they ended up being able to get out of the industrial permit. Now, to be safe, they follow a BMP plan because they're smart. And they know that they don't ever want to be accused of dirtying the water. So they have a BMP plan they follow. They keep things clean. Now, also keep something in mind. Just because you're not required to have permit coverage doesn't mean you can pollute the stormwater. Because in general, you're not allowed to pollute any water. You're not allowed to pollute anything. So whether your business requires your SIC code requires coverage or not, if you pollute stormwater, that's a violation of the Clean Water Act. So even without general permit coverage, you still are not allowed to pollute stormwater. But those who are required to have permit coverage have to have permit coverage that based on their SIC code. So it starts with the Clean Water Act. From the Clean Water Act, they have certain categories of what they call sectors. That's why the federal government has their own industrial general permit. It's called a multi-sector permit, okay? And sector being transportation, landfills, things like that, those different sections of it. So, in those different categories. And then a lot of those have specialized what they call ELGs, or effluent limitation guidelines, extra stuff added to them. For example, airports. If you do de-icing, then you have some extra requirements of you because you do de-icing. You have to sample for additional parameters and things like that. In fact, we'll talk about that in part 2 at 8:30 about some of the things you're required to go samples for. So so I hope that covers pretty much what it is. That's a good question. Why do I have to have permit coverage? Well, it's required by the Clean Water Act. And 2, am I supposed to have coverage? Well, take a look at attachment A. Look at your industrial activity. Find out what your SIC code is. Also, the Labor Department under OSHA has a SIC code website where you can look at your industrial activities and see if you can figure out what your SIC code is. And then from there, you can determine whether or not you require permit coverage. That's a good question. Thank you. Is there any other questions we can tackle?
None in the chat yet, but if anyone wants to ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself or type in the text chat here on Zoom, and I'll be sure to pass it on to Aaron.
So there are other things. Since I went through it real quick, we can do a little backup on it. Talk about some of these minimum BMPs, because again, these are required. So we talked about good housekeeping, which basically is pretty much just keeping the place clean. 2, preventative maintenance. Again, we talked about that as you need to apply maintenance to your facility. You can't just one and done. It's not like where you could put in a BMP, walk away, and not ever address it again. I mean, that's a recipe for disaster. And one thing you also keep in mind, one of the things that the permit requires you to do is grab samples. If your water leaves your property, and so a discharge is water or fluid leaving your property. So if water leaves your property, you're required to grab a sample. Okay.
Hey, Aaron, I actually have a quick question here. Can you tell us a little bit about SB 205? That's another question that was asked.
Oh, I believe that's the one about required permit coverage, right?
I think so, yeah.
I'm not exactly sure about that, but I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and feel free, someone come in and chime in on this, but I believe that's where basically they're saying in order for you to get a business license, you have to prove you have permit coverage or prove you don't need it. So, for example, that client I had in here in Lodi, where they were recyclable, they weren't allowed to renew their business license until they could prove they had permit coverage.
Yes, Aaron, this is John Taraskis.
Perfect. Thanks, John. You can add to that.
SB 205 is something we've seen with the municipal permits, and it is it's Senate Bill 205. And what it requires is that before a municipality, city or county, can issue a business license or renew a business license, they have to check the applicability of the industrial general permit to that business.
Yeah, I was right. Yeah.
And so we're seeing a lot of new industrial facilities coming to us seeking help from that because of that whole process. And so don't be surprised if the next time you go to file a renewal for your business license that you're being asked for your SIC code or proof of industrial general permit coverage, such as your WDID number.
And a WDID number is a waste discharge identification number. That's what it stands for. In other words, they consider water leaving your property as having waste in it, whether it does or not. I'm not exactly thrilled with the terminology, but that's what it stands for. So like it was great. They actually started this process earlier. Years ago, they started by facilities that would have to do weights and measures. So in other words, if you were to get a weighmaster's license, they connected your ability to get a weighmaster's license to proof of permit coverage. So they basically, the SB 205 has extended that now to pretty much what John was describing. So that's a good question. And yeah, we're seeing a lot more of that. That's why I'm not, the absolute details, but I've seen a lot of people saying, hey, SB 205, I have to prove I have permit coverage, or I have to prove I don't need it. So again, that guy in Lodi, he put a cover over his industrial area. He cordoned off all his industrial areas so people could only allow to do stuff underneath cover. He was able to get a notice of an NEC, a notice of no exposure certification. In fact, just recently they were inspected by the water board and found that their NEC was valid. So that's one thing you need to keep in mind. Let's just say you want to file an NEC. Well, great, but make sure that the NEC is valid. I had another client recently where they filed an NEC, but it was not applicable to their facility, and so it was revoked. So they may grant you the NEC initially, but they will come knocking on your door. They will come seeing if your NEC status is legitimate. So make sure if you do file an NEC that you actually have no exposure. Because if you do, and they can revoke your NEC status. Which has happened. So that's an excellent question. Any other questions on the chat, or anybody else want to unmute and chime in and ask a question?
No other questions yet, in the chat at least.
Perfect. Let's go for it.
Oh, no other questions yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just had another question. Okay, so reviewing the minimum BMPs, again, these are required. So waste management, you'll find that, but again, you'll find a lot of these BMPs are things that you're already doing. They're just good business practices, things that if you're to be inspected by a local CUPA, they're expecting you to do these things anyway. So you'll find there's a lot of overlap with things you're doing with what's required in the general permit. So, and you'll find that it just makes good sense to follow these things. Employee training program, you are required to do training, as we talked about. many times. So they don't really, they describe what you're supposed to be trained as. The permit describes what you're being trained on, but doesn't give you a point by point. But you're supposed to be appropriately trained. You're supposed to understand what you're supposed to do, what you're required to do. So that's what we're trying to do in Stormwater Awareness Week, is kind of give people the basics of what's going on here. So that's why I broke it up into 3 trainings. And this is the first time I've broken it up into 3. That's why we're kind of getting a feel for how this works, because usually I try to fit everything into one workshop, which that's why I screamed through these slides originally, because usually I run out of time before I get through everything.
Aaron, I have another question here. Can this class count as a facility training?
That's up to you. I believe yes. I believe it will account for it, because it says you need to be appropriately trained. And so this one here, we're talking about what's in the general permit and why you have to have permit coverage. And then I'd recommend, to round it off, to really make your training viable, that a regulator would say, yes, I agree with you, is to do part 2, where we talk about what the permit requires you to do, it expects of you. So I believe so. But again, it's up to you to make the determination. So for some people, they have their employees review the stormwater pollution prevention plan in detail. They can, but many times plans are quite involved because of all the requirements that the general permit has now. Remember, your plan makes up sections 10 and 11 of the permit. But if you remember what I showed you earlier, the permit has got over 20 sections in it. So there's a lot to this permit, and your plan and your monitoring only make up sections 10 and 11 of the permit. So there's a lot to it. So many times it's better just to try to have someone boil these down into your basic necessities.
We have another question here. It says, who specifically needs to be trained? Do different job duties require more or less training? For example, an LRP versus a yard worker.
No, that's an excellent question. Now, the interesting thing is the permit doesn't require, interestingly enough, it doesn't require LRPs to be trained, though they should be. It says pollution prevention team members. So if you're someone if you have someone that's supposed to be doing stormwater training, if you're outside, if you're working, if you're doing the cleanup, if you're applying the BMPs, you need to understand the BMPs you're supposed to be doing, the minimum BMPs, and also whatever advanced ones you have. If you're the person who does the inspections and does the sampling, you need a greater amount of training to make sure you follow through on that. So they need to be appropriately trained. So if you're, for example, if you're a receptionist, or if you're a administrative worker in the building, and you never do anything out in the warehouse or do anything out in the yard, you don't necessarily are required to have general permit training, okay? Because you're not applying any of the BMPs, anything that's stormwater. However, if you work out in the warehouse, if anybody in general, they need to have permit training, because they need to know what the requirement, what the minimum BMPs are, and what they're supposed to do, where spill kits are, how you're supposed to, and if you're the person who grabs samples, or if you're the person who do the monthly inspections, then you need to make sure you know how to do those. So it's different. If you're an office worker who never does anything with BMPs, then no, you don't require permit training. Okay. LRP, I would recommend that LRP be trained, only because they need to know what's being done underneath them, because ultimately they're the legally responsible person. That's what LRP means. So it really is on their shoulders to have the responsibility. So they really should have at least a good overall, not necessarily specific, but a good general knowledge of what the permit requires. And then the general workers out there, anybody who works out with materials, anybody who moves stuff, they need to have a good understanding of the BMPs that are required for them to do. And then people who do the inspections had to have more training, those who do sampling inspections. So I hope that covers the question. That's a good question. Thank you. That's an excellent question. Thank you for that question.
Aaron, just a quick reminder, we have 5 minutes here till we hit our 8 o'clock time.
Okay, great. So with the 5 minutes left, do I have any other wrap-up questions or anything else I can do? So in general, Clean Water Act requires that we have these things. Now, one thing I forgot to mention earlier is if you look at the general permit that we're under, it says the California Industrial General Stormwater Permit. And you're saying, wait a minute, I thought you said it was the Clean Water Act. Well, the Clean Water Act allows for states and requires states to carry their own program. And so if the state has its own program, then and they apply for and they're accepted by the EPA, then they administer their general permit program. So it's an NPDES program administered by the state. So California has its own general permit. It is a California issued permit with federal backing. Okay, for those facilities, for territories in certain areas where they don't have direct state programs, they're under the multi-sector general permit, which is put out by the federal government itself. And you'll find that our permit in many ways mirrors the multi-sector permit that's put up by the federal government. Perfect. So thank you. I want to again thank you for your time. I know we went through the slides really quick, but again, this is the first time I've broken it up into 3 instead of just one program, because that way it gives more time for me to answer questions and to take a little more time to describe these things. Remember, the best defense is a good offense. You want to get ahead of these things. You want to go ahead and think through these programs, think through what you have, think about how can we respond, make sure that people out in the yard know where it is, people out in the warehouse, people who work know how where things are, where split kits are. I think of all the minimum BMPs we talked about, good housekeeping to me is one of the key ones. If you keep the place clean, then you have the best chance for a positive result. I think another real positive one is if you could put in discharge minimization or ponds, things like that, to help reduce the number of stormwater discharges, then that's really helpful, because then you don't have to you're not required to grab as many samples. You're only required to grab samples if they leave your property. If the water doesn't leave your property or go into a drain that leaves your property, you're not required to grab samples. So make sure that you, if you can, install these things. But again, it really all starts with being ahead of the game before the rain starts. And we'll talk about that in part 2 and part 3. Before the rain starts, be ready. It's all about being proactive. So, well.
Hey, Aaron, this is John Tarascus. Can I give a plug?
Absolutely.
So we have on Stormwater Awareness Week 2 keynote sessions. One today will be with Amy Cronson. In fact, you can watch it anytime today. It's already on there. It's pre-recorded. She took Laura Wardrop's place at the State Water Board. And so she is overseeing both the industrial and the construction general permit. And then the other workshop with the Water Board that should be watched is on Friday with Pushpa Zachariah and Ella Golovi, both who work under Amy with the industrial general permit. So they're the industrial general permit leads. And we interviewed them, and we have lots of industrial general permit questions for them. And I think you'll find it very educational. So if you'd watch those 2 and find out not only what's going on with this permit, but what can people expect in the future.
That's good. Thanks, John. And after these presentations are over today, I'm going to try to put up on the website a certificate that you can print up. So that way you can, if those who do these different workshops can check off, hey, I've done my annual required training. And also I'm going to see if I can't put these slides together and put them up there too, so you can download the slides as well. For those of you who have general permit coverage and are here, remember that any training you do actually needs to be kept in your binder itself. The permit says you're supposed to keep things on file for 5 years and readily available. But in specific, when it comes to training, you're supposed to actually keep your training records in your stormwater pollution prevention plan. So make sure that whatever you print up or whatever proof you have of your training for this year, we're now in the 2020-2021 monitoring year. It's a fiscal year. It goes from July 1st to June 30th. Okay. So we are now in the 2021 reporting year. So this training is in the 2021 for this monitoring year, this reporting year. So you want to, whatever we put on the website, which I'm going to try to put up by the end of the day today, hopefully, or by tomorrow, that you can download it and then you can put it in your web saying, hey, I did this training and here's what we looked at. Well, I think time is just about up, isn't it?
Yes. When time does the second part of your training start today, Aaron?
It starts at 8:30.
Okay.
So thank you all for joining us. I wish you all a well and safe day, and I look forward to seeing you in a half an hour.